A new revelation broke this week about what caused last year's explosion of Nord Stream gas pipelines in the Baltic Sea. Investigative journalist Seymour Hersh alleges the U.S. is behind the attacks. Writing in a Substack, the White House ordered the strike as part of a covert operation carried out under NATO training exercises last summer.
According to Seymour, it was then that the U.S. divers planted the explosives that were remotely detonated 3 months later, disabling the pipelines. In his Substack, Seymour Hersh writes that a spokesperson for the CIA vehemently denies this claim. So I read the Substack post. It was very long. It's very thorough. It includes a lot of seemingly plausible basis of facts, names of equipment used, and he says this kind of Navy diving group that is headquartered in Panama City, Florida. He walks through the timeline of it, but we do have to caution, this is all based on, an anonymous source that he says is familiar with this operation. The source is not named. There are no documents provided. And I am extremely skeptical and critical always when the sources being relied upon are anonymous. I understand in this case why they would have to be anonymous. These are high security clearance officials, people who, could not only just lose their jobs, but could go to jail if they were caught talking to a journalist about it. So I understand why in this case, the mainstream media loves to use anonymous journalists for why Trump was mean to someone for totally ridiculous reasons. So here it's justified, but you still have to take it with a grain of salt. And I know Seymour Hersh has done terrific work in the past. It is also work that some of his more recent work has come under scrutiny, again, for relying on anonymous sources. I don't know. I've said when we talked about the subject before, I think it is perfectly plausible that the U.S. could have blown up Nord Stream. I think it is in keeping with operations the U.S. has run in the past, but I would need to see conclusive evidence to say that that's the most likely thing that occurred. And this while presenting a very plausible, again, how this would have happened, I would need documentation. I want to see documentation, or I want to see an on-the-record
kind of documentation? An email from a general to a soldier on a submarine that says, please blow up Nord Stream pipeline tomorrow at 3 p.m. GMT.
Well, no, it doesn't need to be exactly that specific, but
look.
Well, no, you're talking about wanting to see documentation and not just making.
Yeah, but to your point, I think that this is one of those instances where you're not going to get documentation. You might get a disclosure, a verbal disclosure, but it's going to be more difficult to be able to ever prove this. But look, the Occam's razor of this particular incident has always pointed in the direction of U.S. involvement. They had U.S. ships doing training exercises in the region at the time of the explosion. There was reporting in this article about how initially it was supposed to be done kind of immediately, and then there was a request to explode the pipeline remotely, so it gave the U.S. a little bit more plausible deniability because it looked so obviously inculpatory to have the training exercises happen right where the explosion then subsequently happens. We have video of Biden officials saying that there are ways to prevent Germany.
Yeah, and that's mentioned in the Substack. The
Russian
officials
oil.
Saying Nord Stream will not happen one way or another. Yeah,
right?
Ominous.
And then in the interest, obviously, who benefits from the pipeline being destroyed? The idea that Russia was going to destroy a pipeline that enabled it to sell its oil to a huge market at a great profit was always sort of absurd. But that was the narrative that so many American politicians and journalists were kind of floating in the wake of the explosion. So again, of course, caveat, we don't know actually, we can't conclusively know what happened, but this reporting from a very respected journalist who, it's worth noting, has been smeared in the context of him writing the story. But the story seems to confirm what the most obvious explanation for the Nord Stream pipeline explosion has always been. Whether or not we ever find conclusive evidence of what happened, time will tell. But the U.S. involvement in international conflict has drawn the ire of many, especially those who contend it's purely motivated by the military-industrial complex. Former Pink Floyd rocker Roger Waters spoke at the United Nations Security Council on behalf of the Kremlin on Wednesday and called for an immediate ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. Let's take a look.
Ceasefire in Ukraine today. That, of course, will only be the starting point, but everything extrapolates from that starting point. Imagine the collective global sigh of relief, the outpouring of joy, the international joining of voices in harmony singing an anthem to peace. John Lennon pumping the air with his fist from the grave. We've finally been heard in the corridors of power. The bullies in the schoolyard have agreed to stop playing nuclear chicken. We're not all going to die in a nuclear holocaust after all. At least, not today.
We should note that it's very important if the U.S. did this. I mean, Congress has not declared war on Russia. They've also not declared war on Germany, who loses out when this pipeline is blown up. I absolutely reject that the president can unilaterally order this kind of action without a declaration of war against Russia. That this is being kept secret from Congress. That was kind of the implication of Seymour Hersh's reporting here, is that this was so secret, even the Gang of Eight or whoever it is, were not even going to be informed about it.